There are few times when franchises of any kind can really touch people. For every Pokemon or Spider-Man that have left an impact on people, there's also the Fighting Foodons or the Max Mercurys that have kind of just been forgotten about as the years roll by. It's harder than some people think to make a series that can truly make an impact on people. Yugioh is one of those series, and with its creator, Kazuki Takahashi, passing away roughly around the same time I posted our last video, I felt like we should take this episode to talk about his wonderful, if crazy, series and the impact it left on folks. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. As it is, when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, there's very little I think I really need to go to introduce to most people. Nearly everyone has heard about the little anime about a young kid who plays children card games while housing an Egyptian pharaoh within his body. And if you don't, well, it's a bit of a wild ride if what I had just said is any indication to the series. And like Pokemon before it, Yu-Gi-Oh has since gone on to produce not only a real-life card game based on the game within the anime itself, but also video games, several more anime sequels that are only tangentially connected to the original series, and movies, including a movie and a separate anime that was directly an American product that was made in thanks to how popular it was. Not even Pokemon, with all of its popularity, has been able to do this outside of a single episode. But I'm not really here to talk about the series, at least not in the traditional manner in how I go about my show. Usually when I talk about things on Fascinating Fiction, I do one of three things. I try to introduce everyone to a series as if it's the first time they've ever really been introduced to it. I review it because it's something that I've personally never seen before. Or I try to talk about something core to whatever I'm reviewing that people aren't really familiar with. And I can't really do that with Yu-Gi-Oh! This series is big enough that introducing it to someone for the first time seems kind of pointless. I don't really think there's any one part of it that I could review having never seen it, both because of the length of each individual series, as well as the fact that it would not be a good tribute to its creator's passing. And the fact of the matter is that there's so many interesting little factoids within Yu-Gi-Oh! That it would be kind of insane to try and do a deep dive into the franchise without picking a select part of it. And the one that I'm the most familiar with is the earlier eras of the show when the dubbing company for kids was at its worst. And that's a dead horse that I think has been kicked enough that it doesn't need me adding my own 2 cents on top of it. Instead, what this episode is going to be focusing on is more my personal experience within the series and some of the impact that I've seen it have over the years, and point out some of the more interesting things about the series I feel like I wouldn't have to go super deep into the franchise to really explain. This doesn't mean that we won't be covering the series in depth in the future, but I wanted this time around to be more about the lasting legacy that was left by Takahashi, and I felt that going into a more personal recollection would better reflect that. So let's start off things about how I first got into Yu-Gi-Oh! As I established before, I'm a big Pokemon fan, and back in the 90s that was pretty much what my life revolved around. This included, of course, the anime, and when new episodes would appear on the old network block of Kids WB, I was always ready to watch the newest adventures of Ash and Company. We had a lot of other shows that were put in on the same time, either because of their popularity or to try to beat upcoming networks doing the same thing, like how Fox Kids was a thing. This is how shows like Card Captors, Jackie Chan Adventures, and X-Men Evolutions became big talking points for kids and teenagers, because a lot of us were there for the Pocket Monsters and were more than fine just keeping the channel there to see what else was offered. It was around this time a new commercial was being shown, one that hit a chord with a lot of kids at the time.
It's time to duel!
Now, I'm not sure if this is actually the first commercial for Yu-Gi-Oh! That I ever saw, mostly because, honestly, it was something that was almost 2 decades ago. Yes, I am old, but regardless, it was something like this that got me interested. And when WB itself started showing the anime, me and my little brother really got into it. To be entirely honest though, I didn't actually remain within Yu-Gi-Oh for all that long. Like many other trading card games at the time, there was the problem where if you wanted to get anywhere in the game, especially if you were playing it against other people competitively, you needed to shell out the dough to get the good cards. And then there were just some cards that were flat out broken back then. Everybody had Regeki, Black Hole, and Jinzo in their decks, and I quickly lost the appetite to play them a lot when I jumped through so many hoops to play something big, only for it to be destroyed by something like Trap Hole or some other nonsense. Now, the anime instead was something that I stuck with for a lot longer, and knowing what I know now, I'm gonna call Yu-Gi-Oh what it is. It's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure specifically designed to appeal to the Pokemon crowd. And I mean this in a compliment, by the way, but honestly, look at how the show is stylized. The hair, the way the characters are designed, the poses. Dear God, the poses. We've had anime before that were all about going over the top, but it was this series that really cemented the go crazy or go home attitude. In fact, if I had to say any anime is what really inspired others to go over the top and turn anything, and I do mean anything, into a dramatic, fun-filled anime, it would be the one starring Yugi and friends. Yes, I know I just called this series JoJo with Pokemon, and that JoJo itself was the one that started the whole let's make something small and silly into a huge dramatic battle with the fights against the Darby brothers. But let's be entirely honest, JoJo does not have the wide-reaching appeal that Yu-Gi-Oh does, even to this day. That's probably one of the things that always stuck me the most with this series, in just how over the top it is, and by virtue, just how crazy it can get, allowing other animes to do the same. While yes, we do have anime that has giant robots fighting each other, magical girls with magical familiars, and even alien martial artists that use laser beams to attack, the characters and actions are still grounded in reality. The giant robots are fighting because of a political war, the magical girls are protecting the souls of the innocent, and the alien martial artists are doing their best to try and prevent the Earth from blowing up. Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have this because the idea of everyday problems, actions, and events being centered around a children's card game is just such an out there idea. Some guy is threatening to go out and hurt your little brother? Challenge him to a card game to save him. A rich snob is putting down your friends? Beat him in a card game to show who's better. The police are on your tail? Card games allow you to get your freedom. It's because of Yu-Gi-Oh! That a lot of other animes that revolve around one particular event being something that everybody plays and uses to settle their differences. Some of these were other card games, like Duel Masters, while others went with the other collectible and functional bits of toys, like Beyblades. Hell, I'd say that if it wasn't for Yu-Gi-Oh, we wouldn't have anime that's based on sports like Prince of Tennis or that new golfing anime Birdie Wing. Shows that take the idea of something simple like a sport that people play for fun and make it into life or death situations. I will say though that I've personally not watched much of the anime outside of what I was into as a kid. I watched up to the point where Merrick was a big deal and got to the end of that tournament that he was involved in before the battles kind of got to be too much for me. Not in the sense that they were boring or anything, but more it was like it was made up as it was going along. It's an aspect that some animes don't really pull off very well, where, oh, you couldn't have beaten me, I had the ability to do this all along, happens way too often, and it feels like the only reason they were doing it is to extend the fight by that much more. I have been watching the 5Ds anime, yes, the infamous card games on motorcycle series, and from what I've seen, it's actually a bit more streamlined than the original franchise. Not sure if that's enough for me to stick around, but it's enough for me to get to wanting to play at least some of the card game again. If there's one thing that I say that I'm a bit sad about considering the state of the series as a whole, it would be the fact that we actually never got to see Takahashi's original idea for Yu-Gi-Oh! For those who don't know, in the original manga of the series, it wasn't revolving around the card game that would soon consume it. Instead, the main elements were more based around a bunch of different games, each with their own rules, and the loser more often than not would be killed. This would be things like playing a game of air hockey, where the playing field was a hot skillet and the puck was a piece of ice with a tube of nitroglycerin in it. Yeah, it was kind of insane back in those days. The only reason it went down the card game route is because after they showed it for the first time in the manga, Shonen Jump, the people who were helping publish Yu-Gi-Oh, got so overwhelmed with letters about how to play the game as well as where to get all the cards involved with it, and thus it started down the line into becoming the massive collectible card game that it is today. Honestly, there's a lot more that I could go into when it comes to the series of Yu-Gi-Oh! From just what kind of crazy stuff happened within it, the story of the people behind the American version of the show, and just the ongoing insanity that is the spin-off animes. And this is with me not even really being that big of a fan of the series, just knowing a few basic things from my exposure over 2 decades ago and what little I've gleaned from watching some of it within the last few months. To say that Kazuki Takahashi's series had an impact on not just the anime industry, but the world as a whole would honestly be underselling it. There are few franchises that have had as wide-reaching appeal, interesting characters, and just crazy off-the-wall anime-ness that Yu-Gi-Oh! Had. The world is poor with his loss, and while I might not be the best person to talk about the series, what with my own lack of love for it, I will always have respect for the man who's given so much to everyone around me, who's inspired others to make their own shows, games, and more. So pick up an old pack of cards, dust off that old video game cartridge, and play one round of Duel Monsters, if only to take part in the wacky, incredible series that Takahashi gifted us. With all that said, I hope I've done a good job to entertain you, and I'll do my best to do so again in the future. Hopefully you'll follow along with my content by subscribing and doing all the other things that gives us YouTubers life. If you wish to support me a bit more, I do have a Patreon where you can go and get access to bonus content. But until next time, stay frosty.